Treasurer, thanks so much for joining us today at Bloomberg.
Thanks very much, Ben.
So this is your fourth budget. Your first three were really defined by controlling inflation and setting up new sources of growth. How do you define your fourth budget?
Well, this will be a responsible budget which focuses on cost of living relief without ignoring our responsibilities to the future. The uncertainty in the global economy casts a shadow over the world, and it casts a shadow over this budget. And so our job is to provide that cost of living relief in a responsible way at the same time as we make our economy more resilient to these external shocks.
Now, you've said that the underlying budget bottom line will be pretty close to what it was at MyEFO, but economists, including those at Bloomberg, expect a revenue upgrade potentially as much as $15 billion. Now, obviously that's nothing compared to your first budget upgrades, but is that discrepancy because you plan to spend that revenue upgrade?
Well, a couple of important points about that. I mean, first of all, the mid-year budget update was only about 3 months ago. The March budget is relatively unusual in Australia. We usually go in May. And so the bottom line will be roughly the same than we saw in December. When it comes to revenue upgrades, there'll be quite a small revenue upgrade, much smaller than what we've seen in earlier years. Nothing like what you're suggesting in your question. But what the bottom line will reflect is the really responsible way that we've gone about managing the budget. We have helped engineer the biggest ever nominal improvement in the budget in a single parliamentary term. You know, a $200 billion turnaround in the budget, 2 surpluses in our first 2 years, a much smaller deficit in the third year than what we inherited from our predecessors. All of that means less debt and less interest on that debt, which is a big structural pressure on the budget. So one of the defining features of the fourth budget of this government, a bit like the first three, is responsible economic management, not instead of helping with the cost of living and investing in the future, but as well as.
Now, you've mentioned cost of living measures, and there's widely expected to be new measures in this budget, including potential electricity subsidies. But given the fact that global growth is slowing and that inflation is coming down, rates are coming down, do you expect that you're reaching the end of your sort of inflation curbing policies and starting to shift to a more stimulatory fiscal policy?
Well, cost of living is still front of mind for most Australians, and it's front and centre in this budget. We recognise that despite the very substantial progress that we've made together on inflation, people are still under pressure, and the budget will help with some of those cost of living pressures. We're making medicines cheaper, a huge investment in bulk billing because more bulk billing means less pressure on families. We will extend the energy bill rebates for 6 months because that's hip pocket help for households. So this is a real theme, the central theme of the budget, helping with the cost of living, recognising that even as we make this very substantial progress on inflation, from higher than 6% and rising when we came to office to now in the bottom half of the Reserve Bank's target band at 2.4%. We know that people are still under pressure, and so there's still a focus on cost of living in the budget. But if you take a step back from that, you ask me about the progress that we've made in our economy. The Australian economy is turning a corner. We've got inflation down, real wages are up and incomes are strengthening. Unemployment is very low by historical standards. We've got the debt down, interest rates have started to come down, and now growth is rebounding solidly in our economy as well, led by the private sector. So all of those things are very welcome developments, but we know that there's more work to do because people are still under pressure. There's all of this global economic uncertainty. Those are the 2 big pressures on the budget, and they fuel the 2 big priorities in the budget, which is cost of living help and investing in the future to make us more resilient.
You said they are extending the electricity subsidies by 3 months, was it? Or
no, by 6 months.
By 6 months. Why not longer? Why not a year?
Well, we're doing what we responsibly can. You know, we have to make the budget add up. We need to do everything that we can, but in the most responsible way that we can. The energy bill rebates have played a really important role in taking some of the edge off electricity bills over the last couple of years. We want to extend that for 6 months. This is the hip pocket help that households need and deserve, which recognises that even with all this progress that we've made in inflation, people are still under pressure. And whether it's cheaper medicines, helping with electricity bills, more bulk billing, cutting student debt, these are all of the ways that we can responsibly help.
Interesting. Now, obviously, you mentioned there the global uncertainty. Will we see more support for critical minerals and domestic industry in this budget in response to the America First policies of the US administration?
Well, our Future Made in Australia policy is all about making our economy more resilient. And you've seen that we've announced in recent months, and we will budget in the budget for billions of dollars of investments in green metals, for example, because we think this is an important way that we make ourselves indispensable to the global net zero transformation and also to supply chains as they're being reconsidered and recast around the world. Now, this is a whole new world of uncertainty that we're dealing with here. The changes out of the US, for example, are not surprising, but they are seismic. We're seeing uncertainty, policy uncertainty out of the US. China is slowing. We've spoken about that on a number of occasions. We've got conflicts in the Middle East and Europe. We've got political uncertainty and division around the world. And so the budget is designed not just to respond to all of that uncertainty, but to make ourselves more resilient in the face of those external shocks. And the Future Made in Australia is really the most important way that we're going about that. And there's billions of dollars in new investments in green metals as part of that effort.
Unannounced ones or just the ones you've announced?
The ones that we've made clear already, they'll be budgeted for on Tuesday night. I mean, we've got a huge agenda that brings together our industrial possibilities, the energy transformation, the strengths and advantages that we have in critical minerals and in other areas. And so we intend to play that winning hand. The world is changing all around us. The world is fragmenting. Supply chains are being reconsidered and rebuilt. And we think we've got a very compelling offer to the world. And so the budget is about making the most of that opportunity, maximising our advantages in the interests of Middle Australia.
Now, on that, I mean, about a week after you hand down this budget, in fact, almost exactly, we're going to see new tariffs unveiled by the US administration on April 2nd. Are you worried that those tariffs could throw all your hard work in the budget completely off track if they are particularly, big or impressive?
Well, obviously, we're concerned about these escalating trade tensions around the world. As I said before, they are casting a shadow, not just over the budget, but over the global economy more broadly. Australia's got a very trade-exposed economy, and we are concerned about these trade tensions. Nobody wins from a trade war, least of all a country like ours. And so we're obviously engaged with the US administration, with our counterparts there, but we're also designing a budget which is all about making sure that we are beneficiaries, not victims of the way that the world is changing. Future Made in Australia is part of that. The Buy Australia plan is part of that as well. All of this is about recognising the way the world's changing and trying to make sure not that just we're not victims of that change, but that we can benefit from those change as countries around the world are looking for reliable partners like us.
Now, you've mentioned the sort of negative side from the US, but there's a potential positive side in that the new tariffs put on China might unleash a wave of economic stimulus from Beijing. I mean, obviously, there's a few unknowns at this point, but in your opinion and in the Treasury modelling, do you think that will end up being a net negative or a net positive to Australia when balancing those two factors?
Well, we've seen a number of steps taken by the administration in Beijing to try and support growth in the economy, but we're still seeing China slowing. What you'll see in the budget is Treasury's forecasts for China and for the US. They expect and they will forecast a slowing in both economies, and there's downside risks in both places. And when you've got the two biggest economies in the world presenting some risk to the global outlook, very weak period of global growth, then obviously we take that into consideration. We're not revising down the American forecast, for example, in the budget documents on Tuesday night, but we do talk about all of the downside risks from the two big economies in the world with their own share of challenges, their own share of uncertainty. And I think the announcemets that we anticipate between now and the start of April out of DC as just one of those elements of all of that uncertainty.
I mean, if we're revising down US and Chinese growth, I mean, you've talked about Australia turning a corner. Won't that inevitably impact our own growth?
Well, first of all, we're not revising down the expectations for growth in those places, but we are expecting a slowdown in growth in both of those places. And we won't be immune from that. We've made that really clear. We've been very upfront about our concerns about where this is all heading. We do see this as a new world of uncertainty. And that's why it's so important that we have got the budget in much better nick. It's why we are investing in the future of our economy. It's why we are making our industries more resilient in this context, in the face of all of this unpredictability and volatility. That's our responsibility. We take that responsibility. We embrace the opportunity, not just to help people in the near term, but to build Australia's future as well. And that's what the budget will be all about.
Treasurer, final question. We're expected to head to an election within weeks, potentially. Your first term has been really dominated by the inflation crisis, the cost of living crisis. What would a second term of a Labor administration look like?
Well, the budget is really where we bring it all together, the progress that we've made to here and our plans to make the most of it from here. And if you think about that progress, inflation down considerably, real wages and incomes strengthening, unemployment low, interest rates coming down, debt down, growth rebounding solidly. We have actually built together as Australians a pretty remarkable platform for prosperity into the future. And so the budget is really all about making the most of the decisions and the sacrifices that we've made together to ensure that we can build a future that we can all be proud of in the face of all of this global economic uncertainty. But inflation is really, it has been the defining focus of the first term. But we haven't lost sight of the productivity challenge. The second term will probably rebalance that a little bit, a bigger focus on growth and productivity in the second term without forgetting our responsibilities on cost of living and inflation.